Well, spring is here. Look, I want to talk about an issue most people don't actually even know exists. The concept of corporate welfare. Now, we're all familiar, very familiar, with the robo-debt fiasco and how the government of the day, the Morrison-led Liberal National Party, used every aspect of the power they're able to exercise to dehumanise people on social security benefits in this country. And words like dole, welfare, leaners, etc. were used to stigmatise the 33%, that's 1 in 3% of Australians on social security benefits, old age pensions, disability support pensions, unemployment benefits, widows' pensions, and the list goes on and on. And what we have in this country is a social security system. It's not a welfare system where we dole out resources and money to the deserving poor. It is a social security system. It is a two-way process. What a social security system does, it provides security for the whole of society, the whole of the community, by providing for the basic necessities of those people who, for a variety of circumstances, find themselves in the ability to earn an income in a private investment for private profit society. It's a very simple equation. We don't have a welfare system, we have a social security system. But what we do have, which explains why 25 million people are living on a continent can't even look after the basic needs of a significant section of the population. And I'm talking just about people on social security benefits, but people on wages, people in small business who spend all their lives trying to keep a roof over their heads. All those Australians, and that's over 90%, who don't have the disposable income to be part of the investment class in the society. As I've said before in previous presentations, class in Australia is not what it was. It's not based, divisions of class are not based on type of work you do, whether it's blue collar, white collar, salaried, professional. There are 4 classes in Australian society and most of the world. There's the 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, who own over 60% of the wealth in this country. There's the 8% of Australians, that includes tradespeople as well as professionals, people in the public service, the upper echelons of the public service, who have enough disposable income at the end of the day to invest, whether it's stocks and shares or housing. Then we have the great bulk of society, about 60%, that rely on wages through salaries or through small business, small business owners who actually make enough money to keep a roof over their heads. And then we have the further population on social security benefits. So there are 4 distinct classes. And it's got nothing to do with employment, but it's got everything to do with the amount of disposable income at the end of the day. It's interesting that the bottom 40% in this country own 1% of the resources, 1% of the capital, and the top 1%, and when I'm talking about top, I'm talking about financial, not intellectually or morally, they own 60%. So why do we find ourselves in this situation? Why do we have a housing crisis in a country that's this rich? Why do we have people living on the streets? Why do we have 1 million children living in poverty? Why does it take a lifetime to pay a mortgage? Why are rents so high and continue to increase? Why do governments seem to be incapable of addressing any of these issues? When you consider it's not just 25 million people living on a continent, it's 25 million people living on a resource-rich continent, exporting minerals around the world, as well as agricultural products. Why? You would think that the major issue today wouldn't be the racist campaign against The Voice. You would think one of the significant issues in our society that we would be discussing every day, that you would see not just on social media but the legacy media, the government gelded ABC, the corporate-owned media, is the concept of corporate welfare. More money goes to corporations than goes to social security beneficiaries. More money, more resources go to corporations which look after the basic necessities like aged care, health, the list goes on and on. Corporate welfare is a disease. It is a cancer which is robbing this country's population, the majority of the people in this country, whether they're First Nations people or not, it is robbing them of a viable, productive, satisfying future. It is theft on a grand scale. And that theft starts from the fact that resources are given away by state and federal governments to corporations for a peppercorn rent, who then take decades to pay any taxation revenue. At the same time, they receive government support. Whether it's a direct subsidy to the mining sector like the petrol subsidy, or whether it's a subsidy through lax taxation laws which allows major corporations to pay voluntary taxation. That is welfare. Whether it's legislation which allows investors to claim losses on rental property, investment properties, as a tax deduction, or whether it's legislation which allows shareholders to legally minimise their tax. As Kerry Packer used to say, only a fool pays taxation in this country. Only a fool. Because when it comes to large corporations, not only do they get subsidies, they also, as I said before, receive taxation advantages. And most importantly of all, these corporations are so large that they cannot fail. So although we see Royal Commission after Royal Commission after Royal Commission highlight the total bankruptcy of the private sector, especially the private corporate sector, in providing essential services to the people of this country, nothing changes. Because they are so powerful, they determine the parliamentary agenda. Not in terms of telling the politicians what to do, but in terms of building the parameters, building the box within which our representatives are able to fashion legislation. We see this now currently regarding the so-called debate regarding fixing rents and limiting rent increases. 1/3 of the population rents, and some people are paying up to 60 to 70% of their income to keep a roof over their head. This obviously has a detrimental effect, not just on the individual, but on society as a whole, because of their lack of buying power. Corporate welfare exists in many guises, giving taxpayers money to private schools, which in the majority of cases are owned by large religious institutions, which not only don't pay tax legally, but also receive resources from the public, while the public education sector continues to be starved of funds. We see it in the health sector, where you have a private health sector and a public health sector. Now, I've got no problem with people with resources buying private health insurance, but the problem is that private health insurance, which about 43% of Australians currently have, private health insurance is subsidised by the federal government to the tune of $7 to $8 billion per year. We saw the same aspect as far as corporate welfare was concerned in the aged care sector, where wages are so low, or were so low, that a 20% increase was needed to ensure that there are enough people in the aged care sector to provide basic services to a growing, ageing population. So what happens? The government pays the private sector to provide that wage increase. We see it in the renewable energy sector, obviously, for generations. Since the privatisation of most energy sources in this country, we've seen welfare, corporate welfare, go to large corporations, centralised large corporations, 3 or 4 businesses which dominate the electricity and gas distribution system, being paid handsomely by the federal government to provide those services. We are now seeing it in the renewable energy sector. Obviously, we need resources in order to expand and create a renewable energy sector. But what happens? Instead of the government of the day at the state and federal level using taxpayers' funds to create publicly owned, decentralised energy systems, what we see is $40 billion of taxpayers' money going to the renewable energy sector, going to the private sector to build large centralised sources of energy. We see this problem everywhere in our community. If you don't have a taxation system which ensures that income is redistributed, if you don't have laws which prevent large corporations from dominating every facet of our existence and competing against small businesses, what we see is the same thing happening year after year. 90% of small businesses close within 5 years, mainly because of unfair competition from the corporate sector. Anybody looking for a hardware shop today will be hard pressed to find one in any major city or regional centre because of the bananisation of the hardware industry. And we see this everywhere. We see it in the takeaway industry with the McDonaldisation of takeaway food. We see unfair competition against small businesses, and we have small businesses jumping up and down talking about unfair labour costs. The thing is, it's not about labour costs. It's ultimately the amount of resources and money and legislation which is put in place to support the corporate sector at the expense of the rest of society. This is what corporate welfare is all about. In the everyday equation in a private investment for private profit society, you have 3 major players. You have major shareholders of publicly owned companies. You have customers and you have workers. Now obviously, large corporations which are dependent on corporate welfare, as we saw during COVID-19, when billions of dollars went to major corporations who were overpaid grossly, and then there was no mechanism via which the government could recoup those costs, while at the same time this was going on, we had the robo-debt fiasco, which led to the suicide of a number of Australian recipients of social security benefits because of the pressure they felt. At that same moment, we had billions of dollars going into corporate welfare, into large companies during the COVID-19 crisis, which we are now, as a community, being forced to pay back. So corporate welfare is a cancer. It's a cancer which destroys all of us. It's a cancer which destroys the future of our children and grandchildren. It's a cancer which destroys the nation as a nation state. It is something that needs to be addressed radically as soon as possible. If governments are not willing to address this, then we need social community movements which pressure governments to address this major issue in our society. We should not have private Australian charities raising money to send Australian children to public schools. We should not have 1/3 of the population living on the breadline on social security benefits, many below the Henderson poverty line, because there's not enough taxation revenue coming in because of the legislative defects in our system. We should not have major parties, the Liberals, the Nationals, the Labor Party, kowtowing to the corporate sector and asking, how much do you want this week, this month, this year? We should be seeing legislation being pushed through Parliament which addresses these issues. We don't see this. We don't see it. We don't even see it discussed during the height of the COVID-19, when billions of dollars was going to corporations which didn't need them. The government of the day wouldn't even let the population know which companies received how much, let alone try to recoup some of that money they were not ever entitled to. Well, at the same time, they were using every device available to them, legal and police, to recoup debts which didn't exist among social security beneficiaries. And the tragedy is that we don't seem to have learnt anything. And that is the tragedy about living in this country today. We are a people that has forgotten where we come from. We are a people that's forgotten its past. We are a people that doesn't understand the present, and that we are a people that will have no future as an equitable society unless we are willing to challenge the concept of corporate welfare. It is a cancer that needs to be rooted out. It needs surgery, it needs radiotherapy, it needs chemotherapy. Without radical options, nothing will change. The first option we have is to ensure that any new money that goes out to provide basic necessities like renewable energy goes to building public institutions which are publicly owned and publicly controlled. The next option, if you're interested, you could always join public interest before corporate interest, because that's what our mantra is about putting the fate of the many before the fate of the powerful few.